In 2025, there were more than 40 ongoing conflicts worldwide, defined broadly to include any instance of the use of armed force between two or more groups, whether governmental or non-governmental. Russia and Ukraine are at war, Iran and Israel, Myanmar, Syria, Yemen, Somalia, Nigeria, and others are all rocked by domestic conflict. But here's the strange part. None of the current conflicts involve two democracies fighting against each other. Indeed, scholars often point out that there's no clear-cut case of two well-established liberal democracies fighting a full-scale war against one another ever. Is that just a fluke, or does democracy make states more peaceful, at least with each other? This is the question advanced by democratic peace theory, and in this video, we'll explore where that theory comes from, exactly what it claims, how scholars have tested it, and why it's played such a big role in shaping foreign policy from Woodrow Wilson to George W. Bush. We'll also take a closer look at its critics, ask whether this peace among democracies is as solid as it seems, or whether we've just been looking at the evidence all wrong. The idea of democratic peace theory is rooted in the 18th century work of Immanuel Kant, and particularly in his 1795 essay, Perpetual Peace. In that essay, Kant argued that republics, governments accountable to the citizens, would be far less likely to go to war with one another. His reasoning was surprisingly modern. If ordinary people bear the costs of war through taxes, suffering, and loss of life, they're less likely to support it. Kant believed that three ingredients could lead to a lasting peace: constitutional governments, international cooperation, and respect for individual rights across borders. But Kant's ideas were largely forgotten until the 20th century, when scholars began to re-examine them in light of an intriguing trend. Democracies just didn't seem to go to war with one another. One of the key figures bringing Kant's ideas into modern international relations was Michael Doyle, who argued that Kant's insights actually aligned with a growing body of evidence, suggesting that liberal democracies rarely, if ever, fight one another. Doyle's work, especially his 1983 essay, Kant, Liberal Legacies in Foreign Affairs, helped elevate Kant's ideas from abstract philosophy to empirical theory, laying the groundwork for what would become known as democratic peace theory. Modern democratic peace theory builds on Kant's insights and offers two main explanations. The first is the normative model, which asserts that democracies share a culture of peaceful conflict resolution. If a state resolves disputes at home through debate and compromise, they're more likely to do the same in foreign affairs, at least with other democracies. The institutional model, by contrast, points to political structures. In a democracy, leaders can't just declare war on a whim. They need legislative approval, they face a free press, and most importantly, they face the voters. That makes rash decisions riskier and war harder to justify. Together, these two models offer a powerful explanation. Democracies not only prefer peace, they're structurally wired to pursue it, especially with other democracies who share similar norms and constraints. So the theory sounds compelling, but what does the evidence say? Starting in the 1980s and 1990s, political scientists like Bruce Russett and John O'Neill began systematically testing the democratic peace theory using large data sets on wars, alliances, and regime types. And what they found was striking. Democracies aren't necessarily any more peaceful, they just don't go to war with each other. In other words, while democracies still do go to war, sometimes quite often, they almost never fight each other. Instead, according to most studies, there's virtually no recorded instance of two established liberal democracies fighting a full-scale war against one another. Political scientists thus often distinguish between two versions of the democratic peace hypothesis. The monadic version suggests that democracies are generally more peaceful overall. They go to war less frequently than other regime types, period. The dyadic version, which is more widely supported by the evidence, argues that democracies are not universally peaceful, but they tend to be far less likely to go to war with other democracies than with authoritarian regimes. Most of the empirical support we've seen, like the studies by Russett and O'Neill, falls into this dyadic peace category. Take the United States. It's fought wars with Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, and others, but never with Britain, France, or Japan, even during moments of major disagreement. These findings have held up across decades of research. Democracies tend to form dense webs of alliances, trade partnerships, and international institutions like NATO or the European Union that further reduce the likelihood of conflict. That said, the pattern gets murkier when we look at newer or unstable democracies. Conflicts involving states in transition, like the Russia-Georgia War in 2008, often don't fit neatly into the theory. Still, among well-established liberal democracies, the empirical pattern is remarkably robust. War is vanishingly rare. Whether that's due to norms, institutions, or shared interests is still up for debate. Or is it? More recently, scholars have raised serious questions about how robust this so-called law of IR really is. And let's start with the definitional problem. What exactly counts as a democracy, and what do we mean by war? Is a country only a democracy if it holds free elections? What about press freedoms, judicial independence? These questions get tricky fast. Critics argue that the pattern may depend on how we draw the lines. For instance, if a state turns authoritarian just before a war, does that mean that it doesn't count as a democracy anymore? That's convenient for the theory, but methodologically shaky. This critique is partially explained by the territorial peace theory, which argues that the stability of a country's borders has a large impact on its political culture. Countries with stable borders and peaceful neighbors, according to this theory, are more likely to develop into stable democracies. By contrast, countries with hostile neighbors and insecure borders are more likely to remain authoritarian. So for territorial peace theory, the causal direction flows from peace to democracy rather than from democracy to peace. There's also the issue of selection bias. Some scholars suggest we're only noticing the wars that didn't happen while ignoring all the factors that may have prevented them anyway. Maybe it's not democracy, but geographic distance, shared alliances, or economic interdependence that keeps the peace. Realists, especially neo-realists like John Mearsheimer, argue that peace between democracies is more about balance of power and shared interests than regime type. Indeed, according to realists, states pursue security above all else. If two democracies cooperate, it's not because democracies are morally superior, it's because it suits their national interests. And then there's the normative hypocrisy critique. Democratic peace theory tends to overlook the fact that democracies often act violently outside the democratic world through drone strikes, regime change, or covert operations. Indeed, as some critical theorists ask, if democracies are so peaceful, why do they spend so much time and money projecting military power abroad? Postcolonial scholars of the Global South argue that democratic peace theory reflects a Eurocentric worldview, casting Western democracies as inherently peaceful while ignoring how those same states have imposed violence on colonized peoples or peripheral regions. So where does that leave us? Democratic peace theory offers an elegant idea, but one that may oversimplify a more complicated reality. And whether it reflects a real pattern or just a convenient myth depends on how democracy is defined, how peace is measured, and how the motives behind state behavior are interpreted. Whether we see it as an ironclad law or a flawed hypothesis, democratic peace theory has had a profound influence on foreign policy, especially in the United States. Indeed, we can trace its impact all the way back to President Woodrow Wilson after World War I. Wilson believed that spreading democracy, especially through institutions like the League of Nations, was the surest way to ensure peace. And that logic never fully disappeared. Indeed, in the post-Cold War era, it came roaring back. President Clinton embraced the idea that expanding a community of democracies would make the world safer. And President George W. Bush went even further. After 9/11, he explicitly cited democratic peace theory to justify the war in Iraq, arguing that a democratic Iraq would be less likely to threaten its neighbors or to harbor terrorists. But this is where theory meets friction. Rather than producing stability or peace, the Iraq War ushered in years of insurgency, civil conflict, and regional tension. Critics argued that imposing democracy through military force ignored the local context and that the real issue wasn't Iraq's regime type, but the strategic miscalculations of intervention itself. And outside the United States, the theory has also shaped the European Union's post-Cold War enlargement strategy, which was premised on the idea that integrating new democracies would promote regional stability and peace. But today the theory faces new challenges. Around the world, we're seeing what some call democratic backsliding, where countries that once appeared stable are now eroding press freedoms, undermining courts, or consolidating power. And if democracy is no longer stable or liberal, does the peace still hold? Despite its critiques, the idea that democracies are more peaceful, at least with each other, still underpins international alliances like NATO and fuels efforts at democratic promotion abroad. Whether as a policy guide, a research puzzle, or a moral aspiration, democratic peace theory remains one of the most influential and contested ideas in the study of international relations. So, what do you think? Is democratic peace theory a compelling insight into global politics, or is it just a story we tell ourselves to help us feel better about the world we've built? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and as always, thanks for watching.